That was a number from Dear Evan Hansen, the Broadway show, which picked up 6 Tony Awards 2 years ago, including Best Musical. It's the story of a teenager, Evan Hansen, swept into a family's grief following their son's suicide. It just opened for an extended run at the Opera House. Ben Levi Ross, welcome to the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So you are Evan Hansen, and the title is Dear Evan Hansen. I saw the show in New York, and I understood immediately that he's such a relatable character. Whether you were a teenager once, whether you feel like you have trouble navigating through society now, I saw the kids around me who were just mesmerized. What makes this character so relatable to audiences?
Well, first of all, I think we have to give it up for the script. Stephen Levinson is sort of a genius in the way that he interweaves comedy into such a serious subject matter, which I feel like is the first thing that audiences are immediately drawn in by. At the beginning of the show, while we're sort of taken aback by how self-conscious Evan is and how sort of self-aware in a negative way he is, we're also rooting for him immediately right off the bat because we all know an Evan Hansen in our lives.
And for audiences who haven't seen the show or haven't listened to the soundtrack yet, what is his struggle? What happens to him?
So Evan deals with social anxiety in his life. He feels like an outsider. He is an outsider. He's on the fringes of society in his high school and in his life. And he gets wrapped up in this lie, basically, unintentionally, with a family who has just who's dealing with the loss of their son, who committed suicide very early in the play. He gets this family to believe that he and this son were best friends, and it was kept a secret for his whole life. And so things start coming up where he realizes that he's being seen, he's getting attention, he's getting, to spend time with the boy's sister, who he's been in love with for years. And so the real sort of moral question of the whole piece is, what would you do to get everything that you've ever wanted?
When I saw it in New York again, I saw how physical this performance is, even to the physical posture, and so it's physical and it's also emotionally wrenching. And I was so struck by the performance I saw, and to think that you're sitting here in front of me and you're going to have to do this every single night.
Yeah.
What is that experience, and how far do you take it?
Well, so, in the beginning, it was actually a really big learning curve for me. It was, how do you sustain a performance where you don't leave the stage for 3 hours every night, you're singing 11 songs a night, you are taking on a physicality that isn't necessarily the greatest for your bone structure, every night. So for me, vocally, that's been something that I've had to work on a lot with, my voice teacher back in New York. We FaceTime twice a week. We talk about the different ways that I can place things so that they don't sort of blow out your voice at the beginning of the week. I take a lot of baths. I sort of try and do as little as possible, actually, leading up to the show every day, just so that I can put all of the energy and focus into the performance.
How deeply would you say you lose yourself in the character and the struggles that he has that manifest themselves in each performance?
I try and actually lose myself as much as I can in it, while still maintaining a proper distance so that it doesn't get out of hand. Also, I'm someone that actually has anxiety, not social anxiety, but situational anxiety in real life. So sometimes I've gotten myself so worked up by the end of the shows that I've worked myself into a real panic attack, which isn't someplace I want to go. That's not healthy. That's not good. You want to talk about sustainability. That's not sustainability. But I really do try and give as much of an authentic performance as I can every night.
Well, this is a remarkable story for you, that you made your Broadway debut essentially at such a young age with Dear Evan Hansen. And you started by understudying 3 characters?
Yeah. So I was at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh studying musical theater. I completed my freshman year there, and I was in New York City for the summer after freshman year, not really having anything to do, and I was auditioning for a play that Michael Greif, who directs Dear Evan Hansen, was directing at the Public. It was called The Low Road. And Michael said, I don't know really what's going to happen with this, but we are having auditions for Dear Evan Hansen for an understudy position next week, and I'd love for you to come to that. So, like, you want to talk about things that are meant to be. I went and auditioned for that. It was sort of a grueling audition process, and I ended up still having to go back to start my 2 weeks of sophomore year of college while still in the callback process for Dear Evan Hansen, flew back, got the job, and then never left New York City. So that was a whirlwind.
When you're backstage watching, certainly you saw Ben Platt play Evan Hansen. How do you use or not use that as you go out and make your own Evan Hansen?
Yeah. Well, I had a really cool opportunity, which was I joined the Broadway company as an understudy in Ben Platt's last 2 months on Broadway, and then he was replaced by Noah Galvin for 2 months, who was then replaced by Taylor Trench for a year. And so I got the opportunity to see and understudy 3 different portrayals of Evan Hansen. All 3 were wildly different from one another. If I had just succeeded Ben Platt, I think I would have felt the pressure to do exactly what Ben Platt was doing, but that's not at all what I took away from that process. I was able to sort of see how things were landing with audiences, how he was dealing with a certain scene. Now I can confidently say that I feel like I've created something that is authentically my own portrayal.
Going back to my experience sitting in the Broadway theater, I also remember distinctly how many people around me were crying. Do you hear that on stage?
Sometimes. It depends on the size of the theater. I really feel like audiences are actually taking pleasure in being able to release into a piece of art like this. Whatever their connection to the story may be, whether it's, they're connecting with Heidi, the parent, and they feel completely seen by her, or whether they are Evan Hansen, in real life, whatever that may be. I feel like the reason this show is such a phenomenon is because there's something for everyone.
This show has kind of a Hamiltonian, for lack of a better term, reaction to it, especially among kids, and I think to a large degree their parents as well. This show is so popular because of the subject matter, and as we began talking about in this interview, how people relate to it. I would therefore imagine that you have a lot of people who reach out to you, or who are waiting for you at the stage door because they identify with you for the person you've just played on stage for 3 hours.
Definitely.
So how do you meet that responsibility?
Well, it was a conversation that we had to have as a cast. We actually had a therapist come in and talk with us about what to do if someone were to open up to you about their issues with self-harm or with, depression or whatever it may be. We have a lot of really incredible organizations that Dear Evan Hansen is partnered with, and anytime that I've gotten a message that feels a little bit sort of like a red flag to me, I take a screenshot of the message, I send it right away, and we have someone from one of our teams, whatever it may be, whether it's the Child Mind Institute, the Born This Way Foundation, the Trevor Project, they reach out to that kid directly, and we've seen really positive results from that, actually. At the end of the day, I'm the actor that's portraying this role. I can only do so much for these people, but I still am so honored that people feel like they can open up to me at the stage door or on social media, but you have to keep that boundary.
Well, finally, after Boston, you're about to wrap up your time as Evan Hansen. Given this training ground that you've just been in, do you feel like you can go off to do anything?
I really do. It's funny. I talk to, my agent and other actors, and they're always like, well, you just did the hardest job. Like, your first one was the hardest one. Going on tour as Evan Hansen, like having to travel and do all of this, now you can do anything. Everything will be easy compared to this. So,
well, we look forward to seeing what happens next. Ben Levi Ross, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.